So first, turning to Genesis and chapter 17. We're looking at the phrase cut off, which is in verse 14, but we're reading from verse 1. In Genesis 12, God calls Abram. So God gives the promise before he starts working with the symbols, which is circumcision in this instance. The symbol is very much connected to the promise in a certain way. And circumcision is very important to Jews, and this passage explains why. Verse 1. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me, and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and will make nations of thee. And kings shall come out of thee, and I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. So this is covering all of the parts of the covenant God made with Abraham, even though it's mentioned earlier in the Bible. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abram, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee, in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep, between me and you, and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. So this verse really makes it look like if you're not going to be circumcised, you're not keeping the covenant. And I think that might actually be the case, but I'm not going to go in on that, because the promise includes the Gentiles. And so there's a promise made irrespective of this covenant. This passage over here might be something separate from what happened in chapter 12, because chapter 12, there's no conditions over there. That's definitely going to be fulfilled in the future. But over here there are conditions. Verse 11. And ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you. Every man child in your generations, he that is born in the house, or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed, he that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Just for interest, do you know what the word circumcise means? Okay, so that's circle. The mark left is a circle.
Okay.
So that's why it's circumcised.
Okay.
He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man-child, whose flesh in his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. And God said unto Abram, As for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her, and give her a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. And then Abram fell upon his face. God decides he's going to bless Abram, and God decides he's going to make a covenant with Abram, and over here there's a condition. They need to be circumcised. He says, if the man-child is not circumcised, he will be cut off from his people. And of course, throughout his life, he always has this decision, okay, I can get circumcised right now because I'm a Jew. It's not like he can say, I'm unable to be circumcised. Unless he's really sick or some kind of problem, usually they would be able to be circumcised. This is for making a deliberate choice not to be circumcised. I believe being cut off from his people means that he would be breaking the covenant, and then he can't have the blessings that God is speaking over here. So this is why Jews all had to circumcise themselves before they could enter into the land. If you remember in Joshua, they all circumcised themselves because they didn't get circumcised in the wilderness. I think it's quite simple. Now, let's turn to the passage in question, and it's Galatians 5. The phrase is in verse 12, but we're reading from verse 1.
The bad doctrine that we're dealing with, I assume, abuses the words cut off is what?
There are various interpretations, but the one that we're mainly going to cover today is the strange interpretation where they say cut off usually means to kill. Now, there are instances in the Bible where cut off does mean kill, but it doesn't mean kill in this instance, like it's not kill in Genesis 17. But there are some arguments saying why it's kill in that place, and I'm going to cover that later.
What's wrong if it is kill? If it's kill, then it's breaking God's covenant?
Okay, let's read the passage and I'll explain.
Cool.
We're reading from Galatians 5 and verse 1. Stand fast therefore in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. What is this yoke of bondage? It's all the ordinances of the law.
Correct. Amen.
In Acts, there is this troubling situation where they're moving over from the Old Covenant to the New Testament. Now, a covenant and a testament is two completely different things, and that can be explained in another time. They, as Jews, knew they had to be circumcised, and it was a serious thing because that's connected to all the promises that God gave Abraham. And so, a lot of them didn't understand, how can we talk about this wonderful promise? God is saying, okay, you can go to heaven, and we're not circumcising people. That was difficult for them to grasp. And so some people stood up and started teaching, okay, no, you have got to be circumcised, otherwise you can't go to heaven. And so they gathered in Jerusalem, they had a council, and they discussed it and said, okay, no, nobody needs to be circumcised. You can go to heaven without being circumcised.
Yep.
And so Paul is talking with these Galatians because they're about to make this mistake. They're about to listen to these Judaizers, to these Jews that saying, we've got to be circumcised. They're about to listen to them. And Paul says, don't do what they're telling you to do. I've got a message for you. Stay with what I've been teaching you. Don't get circumcised. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised, that he is a debtor to the whole law. Christ is become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, ye are fallen from grace. For we, through the Spirit, wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. If you teach that a person needs to be circumcised in order to be saved, then you are saying, okay, there's an ordinance you need to keep. In other words, it's not by grace anymore, and it's not by faith anymore. So your gospel is completely different. You have fallen from grace. Now, even though you might be saved, the gospel you're teaching is completely without grace. That's what many people find difficult to understand in this passage, but not specifically what we're covering today. Verse 6, For in Jesus neither circumcision availeth anything, nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. Ye did run well. Who did hinder you that ye should not obey the truth? This persuasion cometh not of him that calleth you. A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. I have confidence in you through the Lord, that ye will be none otherwise minded, but he that troubleth you shall bear his judgment, whosoever he be. And I, brethren, if I yet preach circumcision, why do I yet suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased. I would they were even cut off which trouble you. For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So Paul says he wished that these people would even be cut off, those people that are troubling them.
Right.
It's almost like a tongue-in-cheek thing of saying, they're telling you, okay, you're going to be cut off if you're not going to be circumcised. Because these people are reading Genesis chapter 17 to the Galatians and telling them, look what the verse says. They're saying you're going to be cut off. And now Paul is saying, I wish you were going to be cut off because you're troubling these people.
Right.
That's what he's talking about. Some people are reading this. I would they were even killed, which trouble you. Instead of reading, I would they were even cut off. They don't read cut off, they read killed. Because in their mind, cut off means killed in most instances. Except if it's really obvious that it's spiritual, they say it means killed. That basically covers the biggest part of this message. So the reason why they say that Genesis 17 verse 14 does not mean simply cut off, but means killed, is because of Exodus 4 verse 24 to 26. Exodus 4. I also think Exodus 4 verse 24 to 26 is one of the most important verses in the Bible, which people seem to omit every time they tell the Exodus story. It's like all of the Exodus movies, they just exclude this part, and it's so important because it explains a lot about why God took them out of Egypt. So Exodus 4 verse 24 says, And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go. And she said, A bloody husband art thou because of the circumcision. So they read this all out of context. They don't look at the passages around those two verses. And they just grab these two verses and say, see, that means you need to be killed for if you don't get circumcised. But looking at the context of what it's talking about over here, you'll see in the beginning of chapter 4, it's all about God telling Moses, okay, I'm going to do signs for Israel. Why am I doing signs? Because it's for the covenant. 21. And the Lord said unto Moses, When thou goest to return unto Egypt, see that thou do all those wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thine hand. But I will harden his heart, that he shall not let the people go. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. I think this is the first time where God calls Israel his son. There's other instances also, but this is important. Israel is God's son, even his firstborn. And also another important thing is, this is a whole other doctrine, but it's important, that Jesus is not the firstborn son. He is the only begotten son. Israel is the firstborn son. So there's actual Bibles that translate John 3 verse 16 as containing the word firstborn son, and that's just going completely against Israel. So Jesus is not the firstborn. Israel is the firstborn. Israel is like the older brother Esau, and Jesus is like the brother Jacob, who in a sense got the promises. Esau wasn't able to fulfill what was needed. Jacob was able to fulfill it. So Jesus fulfilled the law on the cross. Through Jesus, a Jew can be saved today. That doesn't mean God is throwing the Jews away. And which is interesting because the Jews today have this thing about saying Esau is the father of all evil. When they start talking about nations who are evil, they would say this is the nation of Esau. The more evil it is, the more Esau it is.
Oh, wow. So then the begotten would mean not firstborn, but born of God and fulfilling the promise of God.
Yeah, begotten, literally born as a human person. Israel wasn't born as a human person, they were just born spiritually as a nation. Jesus was born as a human person. And to make it even more clear that he's saying, this is my son, Verse 23 reads, "And I say unto thee, let my son go, that he may serve me. And if thou refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay thy son, even thy firstborn."
Right.
So God makes it really clear. Israel is my nation. I've got a covenant with him. I'm going to do signs and wonders. And this covenant is very important.
Right.
So a Messiah, a prophetic savior who disregards circumcision is not a true Messiah in any case. And God will kill such a Messiah because he's a false Messiah. If you keep in mind the Antichrist, what does he do in the middle of the 7 years? He stops the sacrifices. And we're going to see in a moment that if a person stops the sacrifices or disregards the sacrifices, he is also cut off. So then the Antichrist is killed because he's presenting himself as a Messiah. I think that's what makes a difference over here. Because Moses was to be a Messiah, that's why he gets killed over here. Moses is not a king like Jesus, but there is a verse in the Bible that said that Moses was a king, but it's only one verse. The Jews overall understand, okay, there's a difference between their coming Messiah and Moses, even though they're a lot similar. Okay, so let's look at what Zipporah says. She says, verse 26, "And he let him go, and she said, A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision." She got married into this a nation where all the children has to be circumcised. In other words, all the children need to bleed to be part of this nation. And she had to make her own child bleed just to save her husband. And I can understand why she would say, wow, a bloody husband art thou because of the circumcision. It makes complete sense if you consider that she had to make her own child bleed to save her own husband. Because for a person from another nation, that would make no sense. Imagine we had to do that. That wouldn't make any sense to us.
So I can't remember, so I'm just asking for clarification. He was supposed to circumcise, he didn't. She had to go and do that because God was going to strike him down.
Yes, God was.
And so she did what he's supposed to have done.
Yeah.
Alright. Just making sure.
Yeah, and the other thing about this passage is Moses is not the one that was uncircumcised. Commandment in Genesis was that if you are uncircumcised, then God will cut you off. This is something different. This is Moses not circumcising his child. There's a difference. So it's this is more about God telling, I'm saving Israel because of the covenant I'm having with Abraham. This is not so much about the individual.
That's just the nation.
Yeah, this is about the nation.
Right.
The people that say that you need to be killed if you don't get circumcised in the Old Testament, they're grabbing this piece out of context. Let's go to Exodus 12 and verse 15. Exodus 12 and verse 15 is just another passage to say cut off doesn't mean kill in every instance. Exodus 12 and let's just read from verse 13.
Okay.
"And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial." So, yes, they were going to be killed in that day, but in the memorial, there was no angel going to pass over. So let's look at how the memorial works. "And ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day unto the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel." So you have exactly what you have in Genesis 17 verse 14. That soul won't receive the benefits of the promise. And this obviously doesn't mean kill, although people might think this to be kill. I don't know how they can read it into this passage, but this doesn't mean kill. It just means they are going to be cut off. When you see the words cut off, you need to ask two questions. The question is, what is being cut off? And from what is it being cut off? In most of the passages we've covered, we've seen that over here it's the soul, and it's cut off from Israel. There's a verse in the Bible that says that Jesus Christ was going to be cut off from the land of the living. So when Daniel 9 says Jesus is going to be cut off, you can just cross-reference it with the other verse and say, it's going to be from the land of the living. So it just takes a little bit of study. You don't have to automatically impose an interpretation to a small part. You can study the Bible and find the answers to those two questions. And it's the same with Galatians. Even though it doesn't tell you from what they're going to be cut off, you can just go to the first instance of the phrase cut off in the Bible, and it actually tells you over there. Because the Judaizers most probably was using the first instance to explain to the people, you're going to be cut off if you're not going to be circumcised. Let's go to Leviticus 7 and verse 20. Leviticus 7 and verse 20. Okay, let's read from verse 15. And the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offerings for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day that it is offered. He shall not leave any of it until morning. But if the sacrifice of his offering be a vow or a voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offereth his sacrifice. And on the morrow also the remainder of it shall be eaten. But the remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day shall be burnt with fire. And if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering be eaten at all on the third day, it shall not be accepted, neither shall it be imputed to him that offereth it. It shall be an abomination. That soul that eateth it of it shall bear his iniquity. And the flesh that toucheth any unclean thing shall not be eaten. It shall be burnt with fire. And as for the flesh that be clean shall eat thereof, but the soul that eateth of the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings, that pertain unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, even that soul shall be cut off from his people. So they take this verse and say, see, Hophni and Phinehas, they were killed because they disobeyed this law. Now, just because Hophni and Phinehas was killed doesn't mean people were killed in every instance when this law was disobeyed. And there's much more cut-off laws than just this cut-off law. And I'm quite confident that if you go through all the instances where people commit one of the cut-off laws, that they are not killed in every single instance. Because cut off means cut off. It doesn't mean cut throat. Let's go to Psalms 31 verse 22. There are really a lot of instances of this phrase in the Bible. A person can really go and do a personal study, and yes, a lot of them do say the person is going to be killed, but there are a lot of instances where they are not killed. So let's look at Psalms 31 and verse 22. We're reading from verse 11. I was a reproach among all my enemies, but especially among my neighbors, and a fear to mine acquaintance, that they that see me without fled from me. So his neighbors and even those that saw him and his acquaintances, all the people that saw him, in their eyes he was so detestable that they fled from him. In their eyes, he was just not accepted within their eyes. He was accepted by nobody. This is David talking. And I think this verse is very important for context. Yeah. Verse 12. I am forgotten as a dead man out of mind. I am like a broken vessel, for I have heard the slander of many. Fear was on every side. While they took counsel together against me, they devised to take away my life. But I trusted in thee, O Lord. I said, Thou art my God. My times are in thy hand. Deliver me from the hand of mine enemies and from them that persecute me. Make thy face to shine upon thy servant. Save me for thy mercy's sake. Let me not be ashamed, O Lord, for I have called upon thee. Let the wicked be ashamed, and let them be silent in the grave. Let the lying lips be put to silence, which speak grievous things proudly and contemptuously against the righteous. O how great is thy goodness, which thou hast laid upon them that fear thee, which thou wrought for them that trust in thee before the sons of men. Thou that hide them in the secret of thy presence from the pride of man, thou shalt keep them secretly in a pavilion from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he hath showed me his marvelous kindness in a strong city. For I said in my haste, I am cut off from before thine eyes. Nevertheless, thou heardest my voice of my supplications when I cried unto thee. So you might be cut off from the sight of other people, and they might detest you in their sight, but you won't be cut off from the sight of God. For I said in my haste, I am cut off from before thine eyes. Now, if you're cut off from God's eyes, that might mean that you're going to be a dead man. But that's not what it's about. It's about being pleasing in the sight of God more than it is about being allowed to live in the sight of God. Let's turn to 1 Kings 9 and verse 7. Okay, let's read from verse 4. And if thou wilt walk before me, as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart, and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and wilt keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, There shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. But if ye shall all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them. And this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight. And Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. So here we can just ask the two questions again. What is being cut off, and from what is it being cut off? Then will I cut off Israel, okay, Israel is being cut off, out of the land which I have given them. It's out of the land. They're not being cut off from the land of the living. So the people say, yeah, but in the Babylonian captivity, almost all the people of that generation died, like in the wilderness. Yes, that might be the case, but this is not talking about that. This is about them being cut off out of the land. They were taken out of the land. That's mainly what's going on over here. If it was from the land of the living, then this passage would have said from the land of the living. I don't know how I can make this more clear. So there are other instances, and I'm not going to cover them now. I think we're going to cover the other interpretations of the passage in Galatians. The one interpretation says that the people in Galatians, Paul was wishing for them to be cut off from the assembly. That idea doesn't work perfectly in that context. Just let's read from verse 11. And I, brethren, if I yet preach circumcision, why do I yet suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased. I would they were even cut off, which trouble you. So it's not like they can do something to keep them from troubling him. So keeping them away from the assembly, that's not going to stop them from troubling. It's talking about the passage in the Old Testament that the Judaizers are misusing and telling the Christians, see, it says you're going to be cut off. And just simple cross-referencing, going to the first instance of the phrase cut off in the Bible, makes Galatians 5 so much more clear and makes you understand what it's talking about. And I think actually the King James Bible translators read their Bible and they understood what was going on over here. Now we're getting to the fun part of this message this morning. Okay. The fun part is this. We're going to go and look at how the people translated these. I've got every translation over here. You can pick any one you want.
Cool. Can I just pick a book?
You can just pick any book.
Well, let's do a funny one.
Yes.
This is the funny one. Eugene Peterson. Yeah. I'll start off at 11 because it seems to combine two verses.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. As for the rumor that I continue to preach the ways of circumcision, as I did in those pre-Damascus road days, that is absurd. Why would I still be persecuted then? If I were preaching that old message, no one would be offended if I mentioned the cross now and then. It would be so watered down it wouldn't matter one way or the other. Why don't these agitators, obsessive as they are about circumcision, go all the way and castrate themselves? That is really interesting. Wow. Okay.
Did you expect something like that?
No.
You didn't expect it.
No. Sure. Wow, that's really out there. Well, at least that one wasn't killed.
It wasn't killed.
It was castrated. So,
You will find this in modern versions that they render things in a way that's sometimes not even appropriate for children. They really sometimes focus on sexual things and they phrase things that's not really Christian. Think about what they're saying, Paul is saying over there. Is that the way a Christian talks?
No.
Christian doesn't talk.
Not at all.
Yeah. Have you ever in your life said, okay, I wish this person would just castrate themselves?
Yeah.
That's not the Christian way. We don't talk like that.
And the part that got me was no one would be offended if I mentioned the cross now and then. It's like now and then. It sounds so wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Okay, HCSB.
The Holman Christian Standard Bible. Okay. This is considered to be a fundamental traditional Bible. Or that's what I've heard.
Galatians 5:12. I wish those who are disturbing you might also get themselves castrated.
Okay.
That's interesting. I think on all the Bibles I'm going to read verse 11 and 12 because it flows so well.
Okay.
So now, brothers, if I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been abolished. I wish those who are disturbing you might also get themselves castrated. Sure. That's serious misinterpretation, huh?
Yeah.
Sure. Right. The Good News Bible. Grew up with this in the Methodist Church, right?
You had this in the Methodist?
Yeah, you had the Good News Bible.
Okay.
I see this is today's English version, so I'm not sure what that is.
No, it's the same thing.
Okay. But it was the exact same cover and everything. Right?
Yeah.
But as for me, my brothers and sisters, if I continue to preach that circumcision is necessary, why am I still being persecuted? If that were true, then my preaching about the cross of Jesus Christ would cause no trouble. I wish that those people who are upsetting you would go all the way, let them go on, and castrate themselves. Sure. That's even more harsher. Right. That was the Good News Bible. Now this is the New Living Testament. Dear brothers and sisters, if I was still preaching that you must be circumcised, as some say I do, why am I still being persecuted? If I were no longer preaching salvation through the cross of Christ, no one would be offended. I just wish that those troublemakers who want to mutilate you by circumcision would mutilate themselves. That's even worse. I don't even think they were saying that. Mutilate sounds so vile.
Yeah.
Like circumcision was a wrong thing.
Yeah.
That was the New Living Testament. Sure. Okay, this is a pretty covered one. Institute for Scripture Research. The Scriptures. I don't know this Bible.
It's a Hebrew roots translation. There's various Hebrew roots translations, and they're not so well known. This is the last Bible I read before I went to the King James.
I see. Messianic.
Yeah, I was Pentecostal, so we like the Messianic things.
I see. Like the naming here is in Hebrew.
Yeah, Yeshua and Jehovah and all those things.
Lucas. Galatian. Sure. Okay. Galatians 5:11 says, And I, brothers, if I still proclaim circumcision, why am I still persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the stake has been set aside. Of that those who disturb you, you would even cut themselves off.
Okay, now think about that. Now these people are to cut themselves off. Why would they cut themselves off? How does that make any sense?
Sure. It's almost saying like, I wish they would be damned. And like in Romans where they get that reprobate mind and then cut themselves off. It's like condemning them. Sure. It's really harsh.
Yeah. It's like saying, I wish this person would just decide not to come and trouble you. How does that make any sense? Because the problem is that he's coming to trouble them. Why would you say you wish he decides not to come and trouble them? That doesn't make any sense at all.
And this is the English Standard Version. This would be an interesting one. They call this, isn't this the best modern day translation?
Okay. Yeah, and the other thing is the idea of them cutting themselves off also ruminates of the idea of castrating themselves because they're doing it still to themselves. So I think maybe there's some kind of Greek thing that says this is something being done to yourself and not being done to you. And that's the other thing. The passage, as read in the King James Bible, says, I wish that they would even be cut off. It's like Paul saying that, but they won't be cut off. Why is he saying that? Because when a Jew just regards the few Jewish things that he needs to regard, like the Passover and circumcision, then he will remain a Jew and he will go into the promised land. In other words, Paul is saying these people, they won't be cut off from the promises. He wished that
they would be,
so that they could understand, but they won't be because God's promises can't be disannulled. So the verse is very Semitic. It's only if you're anti-Semitic that you would want to change it.
Yeah, and as you said, he was just being sarcastic in a way. I wish you telling these people to be cut off. I wish you were cut off.
Yeah.
As in, yeah. But these make it more pronounced, as in, like, you know, I wish they would mutilate themselves. I wish, it's like you have a bad heart. 5:12, and again we're in the ESV.
Just read from 11 again.
Yeah. But if I, brothers, still preach circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been removed. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Huh?
It's the same as castrate.
Trying to be politically correct.
Yeah.
Oh, I have one more here. Do you have a specific order, or can I just...
No, you can just read any one you want. So that's the New King James Version.
This is the New King James. And I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. Okay?
It says exactly the same as the...
King James.
No. It says exactly the same as the scriptures. It doesn't say what the King James says. Okay. It says cut themselves off. Oh. So it's also
right.
Also reminiscent of that thing of castrating yourself.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. I could wish. It's such a strange
wording.
Yeah. Okay, the Revised Standard Version. Galatians 5, Revised 11. But if I, brethren, still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? In that case, the stumbling block of the cross has been removed. I wish that those who unsettle you would mutilate themselves. Wow. Right. That's harsh. This is the Amplified. Galatians 5:11 of the Amplified. But brethren, if I still preach circumcision, as some may accuse me of doing, as necessary to salvation, why am I still suffering persecution? In that case, the cross has ceased to be a stumbling block and is made meaningless, done away. I wish those who unsettle and confuse you would go all the way and cut themselves off. Okay, that's interesting. Go all the way. I want to know what's that with that go all the way.
Yeah.
Second time we read that.
Yeah.
The NIV. Hello. Maybe the verse isn't there. I don't know. Right, let's see. Galatians 5:11. Brothers and sisters, if I am still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been abolished. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. Oh wow. It's a combination there of the ESV and the whole way with the Amplified.
Yeah.
Sure. How many is that, brother? That's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Bibles that completely missed the mark.
Yeah.
Sure. Not even one was close.
And it's so easy to understand that passage. The King James just explains what's going on. You can just cross-reference it with Genesis 17 and it just explains what's going on. It's so easy. It's like milkish doctrine. It's very concerning that people are stooping for anything else but the King James Bible. I don't know what this world is coming to. And it's King James Bible readers that are interpreting it as being killed. Why they're interpreting it like this? It doesn't make sense. We are supposed to be the people that interprets this passage in the correct way, because the correct way to interpret this passage explains why all the modern versions are wrong.
Right.
This message was just to get people to realize, we need to interpret the passage in the correct way, and we need to correct this error that we have been making up to now.
Cool.